You're about to watch something that will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Before the lights dim and the music begins, take a second to breathe, because stories like this don't come often, and if this one touches your heart even a little, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach the world. Now stay with me, because what happens next changed lives forever. The boy stood barefoot behind the massive stage curtains, his toes curling against the cold floor as the distant roar of the audience vibrated through his chest. He was small for his age, barely tall enough to see over the edge of the registration table earlier that morning. His name was Mateo, a poor Filipino baby in the eyes of the world, but to his mother he was everything, her miracle, her reason to wake up every day, her last light in a life that had known too much darkness. She squeezed his hand gently, afraid that if she held it too tightly, she might break the fragile courage he had built just to stand there. Mateo had grown up in a tiny shack on the edge of a crowded Manila neighborhood, where rain leaked through rusted tin roofs and hunger was a familiar visitor. Nights were loud with traffic, barking dogs, and sometimes arguments that spilled into the streets. But there was one sound that always cut through the chaos: music. An old radio, rescued from a trash pile and taped together more times than anyone could count, sat by the window. One night, when Mateo was barely old enough to form full words, a song came through the static. It was Scorpions. The voice was powerful, aching, full of longing and hope. Mateo stopped crying. He listened. Something inside him woke up. From that night on, music became his refuge. When there was no food, he sang. When his mother cried quietly so he wouldn't hear, he sang louder. Neighbors would pause outside their homes, surprised by the emotion pouring out of such a tiny body. He didn't understand English, not really, but he felt the meaning. He felt the pain, the dream, the promise that life could be more than what he saw around him. Getting to America's Got Talent felt impossible. They sold what little they had. His mother worked extra hours, sometimes going days without rest. There were moments she almost gave up, moments she held Mateo and apologized for dreaming too big. But Mateo would look at her with steady eyes and say he wanted to sing so people could feel less alone. That was all the reason she needed. When Mateo finally walked onto the AGT stage, the lights were blinding. The audience quieted, curious, unsure. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The other judges smiled politely, expecting something sweet, maybe forgettable. Mateo introduced himself in a soft voice, explaining where he came from, explaining that his dream was to help his mom and show kids like him that hope was real. A few people in the audience wiped their eyes already, but no one was prepared for what came next. The first note left his mouth, and the room changed. It wasn't just good. It was raw. It was heartbreak and resilience wrapped into one trembling voice. Every lyric carried the weight of sleepless nights, of empty plates, of dreams whispered in the dark. The audience leaned forward. One judge covered her mouth. Another felt tears slide down without permission. Simon's confident posture slowly crumbled as he stared at the boy, eyes glassy, jaw tight, fighting emotions he hadn't expected. Mateo sang like someone who had lived 100 lives. His voice cracked at times, not from weakness, but from truth. And in that moment, it felt like the entire world was listening, not to a poor Filipino baby, but to a human soul demanding to be heard. When the last note faded, there was silence. Heavy. Sacred. Then the theater exploded. A standing ovation thundered through the room. The judges were on their feet. One of them was openly crying. Another walked up on stage and knelt in front of Mateo, telling him he was extraordinary. Simon Cowell tried to speak, but his voice broke. He wiped his eyes, took a breath, and admitted that this was one of the most emotional auditions he had ever witnessed. He said Mateo reminded everyone why music mattered, because it connects us when words fail. Mateo looked out at the crowd, overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face. He searched for his mother, who was sobbing uncontrollably in the wings, hands shaking, heart finally believing that their suffering had not been invisible. That performance didn't just change a competition. It changed futures. Donations poured in. Opportunities followed. But more importantly, millions of people watching at home felt something shift inside them. They saw that greatness doesn't come from comfort, that talent doesn't ask where you were born, and that even the smallest voice can shake the world. As the lights dimmed and Mateo walked off the stage, he held his mother's hand a little tighter than before. Not out of fear, but out of gratitude. He had sung his truth, and the world had listened. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you to believe again, to dream again, to listen more closely to the quiet voices around you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because somewhere out there, another child is singing into the dark, hoping someone will hear that you're one click away from a story that will break your heart and rebuild it at the same time. If you've ever believed that miracles are real, or if you're close to giving up on that belief, this is for you. Stay until the end, because what unfolds on that stage will remind you why hope is worth holding on to. And if this story touches you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps these powerful moments reach the people who need them most. The camera opens on a small figure standing alone under massive stage lights, looking even smaller than he really is. The crowd doesn't know it yet, but this boy has already survived more than many adults ever will. His name is Joshua, and he comes from a poor fishing village in the Philippines, where mornings begin before sunrise and nights often end with empty stomachs. His clothes are simple, his shoes borrowed, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of everything he carries inside. Joshua learned to sing before he learned to read. His father used to hum old rock songs while repairing fishing nets, his voice rough but full of soul. Scorpions was his favorite band. These songs have pain, his father once said, but they also have strength. When Joshua was 7, his father never came home from the sea. A storm took the boat. The village mourned, but life moved on, as it always does for the poor. Joshua's family didn't have that luxury. His mother worked endlessly, washing clothes for strangers, her hands cracked and bleeding. At night, when she thought Joshua was asleep, she cried. Joshua heard everything. Music became his shelter. He sang to drown out hunger. He sang to stop his mother's tears. He sang because when he did, it felt like his father was still listening. Neighbors would gather quietly outside their home, stunned that such a deep, emotional voice could come from a child so young. Someone recorded him on an old phone. That video traveled further than anyone expected, until it reached a place Joshua had only seen on borrowed television's America's Got Talent. Getting there was almost impossible. Paperwork, money, fear, it all stacked up. More than once, Joshua told his mother they could quit. She looked at him and said something that would stay with him forever: if you stop now, the world never hears your story. So they went. On the AGT stage, the judges smiled politely. Simon Cowell raised an eyebrow, curious but guarded. Joshua introduced himself softly, explaining that he was singing Scorpions because the songs helped him survive. Some in the audience nodded. Others weren't convinced yet. Then the music started. From the very first note, everything changed. Joshua didn't just sing, he confessed. His voice was haunting, full of loss and longing, trembling but powerful. The lyrics poured out like a lifetime of pain finally finding air. The audience fell silent. One judge's eyes filled instantly. Another leaned forward, hand over heart. The camera cut to Simon Cowell, and for once, he wasn't analyzing, he was feeling. His eyes locked on the boy, glossy, unmoving. Joshua closed his eyes as he sang, as if he were back home, standing by the sea, singing to his father's memory. His voice cracked near the end, not from nerves, but from emotion. And somehow, that made it even more perfect. When the song ended, no one clapped at first. The silence was heavy, sacred. Then Simon stood up. The crowd followed. Judges wiped tears openly. One said she had forgotten how powerful music could be until that moment. Simon tried to speak, but his voice failed him. He paused, took a breath, and admitted he was overwhelmed. He said Joshua didn't just sing a song, he told a story the world needed to hear. Joshua looked stunned. Tears streamed down his face as he searched the audience for his mother, who had collapsed into sobs backstage, hands covering her mouth, heart exploding with pride and relief. That night, Joshua didn't just earn votes, he earned belief. Belief from millions watching who saw themselves in his struggle. Belief from children who thought their dreams were too big. Belief from parents who had, wait, don't blink. What you're about to hear is not just another talent show moment. It's the kind of story that grabs your heart without asking permission and refuses to let go until the very end. If you believe music can change lives, if you believe pain can turn into purpose, stay with me. And if this story moves you even a little, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, because every like helps stories like this reach someone who needs hope today. He stood alone at center stage, swallowed by lights brighter than anything he had ever seen. The crowd saw a small Filipino boy, thin arms, nervous eyes, clothes that spoke quietly of poverty. What they didn't see were the nights he went to bed hungry, the mornings he woke up wondering if today would be harder than yesterday, or the songs he sang into the darkness just to feel alive. His name was Elijah, and this stage was the farthest place from home he had ever been. Elijah grew up in a crowded slum where homes were built from scraps and dreams were considered luxuries. His mother sold street food from a wooden cart, standing under the sun for hours just to earn enough for rice. His father left when Elijah was still learning how to talk. There were no toys, no books, no guarantees, only survival. But there was music. An old neighbor owned a broken speaker that played rock songs late at night. One evening, a scorpion song drifted through the air, raw and aching. Elijah froze. He felt something crack open inside his chest. That song sounded like his life. It sounded like pain refusing to give up. From that moment on, Elijah sang everywhere. In alleys. On rooftops. While waiting for his mother to finish work. He didn't understand every word, but he understood the feeling. Singing became the only time he felt full. People would stop and listen, stunned by the emotion pouring from a child who had so little. Some cried. Some walked away shaken. Someone filmed him. That video traveled far beyond the narrow streets of his neighborhood, all the way to a stage Elijah never thought he would touch. Getting to America's Got Talent felt like chasing a miracle. There were obstacles at every step, money they didn't have, fear they couldn't silence, doubts that whispered they didn't belong. Elijah almost quit the night before they left. He told his mother he was scared to disappoint the world. She knelt in front of him, held his face, and said, "You already survived everything that tried to break you. Sing like that." On stage, the judges smiled politely. Simon Cowell leaned forward, curious but cautious. Elijah's voice shook as he introduced himself, explaining that he came from nothing and that music was all he had. The audience clapped softly. No one expected what came next. The first note hit like a wave. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It was honest. Elijah sang Scorpions with a voice far older than his years, soaked in loss, hope, and quiet strength. Every lyric felt lived in. The room changed. People stopped breathing. One judge's eyes filled instantly. Another pressed her hands together, trembling. The camera cut to Simon Cowell, and for once, his tough expression faded. His eyes glistened as he stared at the boy, clearly fighting something rising in his chest. Elijah sang like he had waited his entire life for this moment. Like every empty night, every tear his mother hid, every dream he was told was impossible had led him here. His voice cracked near the end, and instead of ruining the performance, it shattered the room. That crack carried truth. That crack carried survival. When the song ended, silence filled the theater. Heavy. Emotional. Then Simon stood up. The crowd followed. Judges were crying openly. One said she felt like she had just witnessed a soul, not a performance. Simon tried to speak, but his voice broke. He wiped his face, took a breath, and admitted he wasn't prepared for what Elijah had done. He said music like that doesn't come from training, it comes from life. Backstage, Elijah's mother collapsed into tears, hands shaking, realizing for the first time that her son's pain had turned into power. Elijah looked out into the audience, overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face, no longer invisible, no longer just another poor child. That night didn't erase his past, but it changed his future. More importantly, it reminded millions watching that greatness doesn't ask where you come from. Sometimes, it rises from the deepest struggle and sings its way into the world's heart. So if this story touched you, if it reminded you that hope still exists in the smallest voices, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because somewhere right now, another child is singing through the pain, waiting for the world to listen. Don't scroll away. What you're about to hear isn't just a performance, it's a moment that reminds us why we still believe in miracles. Stay until the very end, because this story doesn't just make you feel something, it stays with you. And if it touches your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, because every share helps stories like this reach someone who needs hope today. The stage lights came on slowly, revealing a small Filipino boy standing in the center of a massive theater. His shoulders were tense, his hands shaking slightly, but his eyes carried a depth far beyond his years. His name was Daniel, and though the world would soon see him as a contestant on America's Got Talent, his life before this moment had been anything but glamorous. He came from a place where dreams were whispered, not spoken aloud, because hope could hurt when you had nothing to fall back on. Daniel grew up in a cramped home made of wood and tin, where rainwater dripped through the ceiling and electricity came and went without warning. His mother worked long days as a cleaner, and his father picked up odd jobs when he could. There were nights when dinner was just rice and salt, and mornings when Daniel went to school pretending he wasn't hungry. But every night, when the world quieted down, Daniel sang. It was the only time he felt powerful. He discovered Scorpions by accident on an old radio that barely worked. The song played through the static, raw and emotional, and Daniel felt something unlock inside his chest. He didn't fully understand the words, but he understood the pain, the longing, the fight. He practiced quietly so he wouldn't wake his parents, singing into a pillow, dreaming of a life where his voice could change something, anything. When Daniel was chosen to audition for AGT, fear almost stopped him. The journey required money they didn't have and courage he wasn't sure he possessed. His parents considered saying no, not because they didn't believe in him, but because they were afraid of what rejection might do to their son. But Daniel looked at them and said he wanted to sing not to win, but to be heard. That was enough. Standing in front of the judges, Daniel introduced himself softly. Simon Cowell studied him closely, expression neutral. The audience applauded politely, unsure of what to expect. Then the music began. From the first note, the room transformed. Daniel's voice carried a weight that silenced the crowd. It was emotional, cracked with vulnerability, yet powerful in a way that made people lean forward in their seats. Every lyric felt honest, like a confession. One judge wiped away tears. Another closed her eyes, overwhelmed. And Simon, known for his steel exterior, slowly broke. His eyes filled, his jaw tightened, and for the first time that night, he looked shaken. Daniel sang as if this was his only chance to tell the world who he was. His voice trembled near the end, but instead of failing him, it revealed everything he had survived. Hunger. Fear. Hope. Love. When the final note faded, the theater was completely silent. Then Simon stood up. The audience followed instantly, erupting into applause. The judges were openly crying. One told Daniel he had reminded her why music mattered. Simon struggled to speak, finally admitting that moments like this were rare and unforgettable. He said Daniel didn't just sing a song, he shared his soul. Backstage, Daniel's parents clung to each other, tears streaming down their faces. Years of sacrifice, fear, and uncertainty suddenly felt worth it. On stage, Daniel bowed his head, overwhelmed, tears falling freely. He wasn't just a poor Filipino boy anymore, he was proof that pain could become power. That night didn't erase his struggles, but it gave him something he had never had before, belief. Belief in himself. Belief from the world. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that even the smallest voices can create the biggest impact, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like Daniel's deserve to be heard and shared.